here inside the Hive. We're at headquarters at Tax Hive. We've got an incredible guest here today. We're going to talk about it. We're going to cover a lot of ground together. We're excited to have you here, Curtis. Sean, I want you to give an intro, give a proper introduction.
I'll do the best I can because you have an incredible resume, by the way. An amazing achievement. So Curtis is a 5 times Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and he's been on over 1,000 radio spots. I happen to be on one of them with him, but he's done over 1,000, and on his radio spots have millions of listeners have listened to Curtis. He's a keynote speaker. He travels everywhere. And my personal experience is you can see his shirt. We have a good shot of that shirt. This is his new book coming out, Counterfeit Emotions. I'd love to unpack some of that. It's a fascinating stuff. My personal experience, we did a men's event together. Have we done a couple? I think we've done a couple. And Curtis gets up there and just the room is literally electric when you're up on that stage. And you connect so well. And we did one at Ready Gunner down the street specifically. There was a group of maybe 80 people, 80 men in there, and you went a deep dive with them. And I was just amazed that we hit that level with some of these men. I remember one of the men standing up and unpacking some really hard things, if you remember this. Oh, yeah. And Curtis just said, "I see you." And this is someone who really bared his soul and some of the really struggles and challenges he's going through and made a really impact with those 80 men, as you do with every room you speak at and everywhere you go. So it's an absolute honor to have you here.
Yeah.
We want to bury everything.
I'm an emotional disaster. I'm going to wear it on my sleeve.
Maybe he's the exception to
I'm
this
the exception to the rule.
I think my wife sometimes is like, "Do you feel anything?"
Right.
That's awesome. Yeah, so the premise behind Counterfeit Emotions is that every emotion that serves us, every emotion that takes us where we want to go, has a counterfeit except for one. There's only one emotion that can't be counterfeited. Every other emotion has a counterfeit, and those counterfeits, they create destructive cycles of disconnection in our lives. And so the trick is, like, we're taught when we were young, I mean, every single one of us were taught opposite emotions. We were taught love, don't hate. And love says hug, hate says hit, right? And that's easy to see the end of the spectrums because they're so different. But the danger behind counterfeit emotions is these are the emotions that slide right up next to the original emotions. They put on the clothing and wear a mask to say, I'm the original emotion, I'm the authentic. Don't pay attention over there, pay attention to me. And that's why they're so dangerous, because they're sneaky. Like, it's easy to see opposite emotions, but those that are right next to, the ones that slide right up to the original emotion and says, that's me.
So give us a real example of the wolf in sheep's clothing. Like, what would you say is the most common counterfeit?
Common, that's a tough one because there's...
the most prominent, the most prevalent, the most...
Or some of the top, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe we just go top.
Yeah, so there's I've identified 36 dyads. And those dyads, for example, let's go back to the love and hate example. The counterfeit of love is lust. Where love and hate says hug, don't hit. Love and lust say, you're putting your lips to someone else's lips in both cases. It's saying kiss and kiss. It's the same action, same motion, but it's done with a very different set of criteria.
Yeah, there's like an element of perverting the truth, right?
Yeah. And one of the easy ones to understand, but also, conceptually it's easy to understand. Emotionally, it's one of the ones that absolutely destroy us as a society, as an individual, is that shame is the counterfeit of guilt. And right now in today's world, guilt is getting a really bad rap. How many times have you heard, "Oh, don't let them guilt you," or "That's such a guilt trip"? It turns out guilt is a beautiful, critical emotion. Without guilt, we wouldn't have civilized society.
Like, that's like the definition of a sociopath, right? Like someone that doesn't feel guilt.
Yeah.
I love that you brought this up. There's four diagnosed mental disorders that can't feel guilt: sociopath, psychopath, narcissist, and antisocial behavior disorder. So if we didn't have guilt, we'd just be a whole bunch of narcissists running around. And
that's a best case scenario.
Yeah.
Of that list.
Of that list.
The psychopaths, sociopaths.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And if you look at the etymology of the word guilt, going back to the 1300s, it actually comes from an Old English word called gilden. And gilden means to repay or make whole. So the feeling of guilt says, I want to make you whole. I hurt you, I wronged you, I did something that disrupted our connection, and I want to make you whole. I also want to make me whole by tapping into that guilt. And here's what's fascinating, specifically with this dyad, or this pairing of emotions, is that up until, if you look at the studies for about 100 years, every single one of the studies say the guilt/shame study. They just put them together. I mean, this one counterfeits guilt so well that even the psychologists for the last 100 years have just lumped them together. And recently, Brene Brown, as well as a university out of Sweden, they did a study where they said, what are the effects of shame? And there is a direct correlation between shame and bullying, shame and addictions, shame and sexual promiscuity, shame and suicidal ideation. All of those, shame is the direct path into addiction. Shame is the direct path into all of these things. But
so guilt kind of takes on a healing mechanism, whereas shame is a little more destructive.
Oh, it's
right. It's
so
that's the contrast you would draw.
A great way to think of it is that guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am wrong. Guilt says I made a mistake. Shame says my existence is a mistake. And so one talks to the character. Shame says your character is bad. The other says your action was bad. Now go fix it. Go make it right. Make the other person whole. And when these new studies came out in the last couple of years, they found that shame was the direct path in to all of these behaviors. Guilt, turns out, it has a direct correlation of getting out of addiction, getting out of suicidal ideation. Like, you want to get into these, go with shame. You want to get out of these, go with guilt. And it's so healing. And you look at the base emotion of guilt, it's actually empathy, which is a high frequency emotion. I hurt you, like I kick you in the shins, I know that hurts, and I don't want that. And because I know how you're feeling, the base emotion of guilt is empathy, that I actually want to connect with you and make you whole.
So where Sean and Tanner have been bald shaming me for a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to help pay for your hair plugs.
Okay, there we go.
I want to make you whole.
All right, good. No, that's remarkable. I've never they're almost
It's
culturally they're almost synonymous with each other, right?
Yeah,
Guilt
yeah.
and shame. So what? Give us another. Can you hit us with one more counterfeit emotion? This is kind of. I'm really intrigued.
Yeah, I want to hear all 36 dyads.
Right,
I learned what a
unpack.
dyad was today. I'm assuming a dyad is like a combination or a pair.
Yes,
right.
a pair of
Nice. It's a $5 word.
Wow.
This is also just, and we'll hear some more, but he's also very unique. I don't think there's another book like Counterfeit Emotions out there where you've identified these. I mean, there's research involved in it, but this is the first of its kind, and I've seen him now present to rooms, and it's just what you're feeling right now.
I'm intrigued, man.
Your mind opens up to say, hey, how do I spend time more on the guilt side, or how do I spend more time in the love side and not the lust side for people, right?
Yeah.
It's very powerful. It's an empowering kind of position to say, hey, where do I need to spend my time and my emotion?
Yeah, and that's what's so beautiful. Like I wish I could say that I learned this from a book or a website or YouTube video, but the way I learned this was the first pair, or the first dyad that I identified, and that was pain and misery. Misery is the counterfeit of pain, and in my life, you were wonderful in the introduction. Oh, by the way, is a 5 times entrepreneur, 1-time best-selling author.
Got it. Yeah.
About to be 2.
Way to not counterfeit it.
Yeah, that's
way
good.
to be almost,
That's a
he's
good
almost
correction.
Me too.
Yep.
Yeah. But I was living a life that I thought was virtuous. I thought that I was living a virtuous life, but in truth, I was living in counterfeits. And along with guilt and shame, one of the most powerful counterfeits, one of the most destructive counterfeits is misery. Misery, it turns out, is the counterfeit of pain. And my whole life, I thought, I'm either living in pain or I'm living in joy and love. And there's this massive wall in between, that pain doesn't exist with joy. Pain doesn't exist with love, that they are exclusive. They don't go to the same parties. You're either in the pain camp or you're in the love camp. And what I realized going through some of my own personal pain, going through, well, the most pain I've ever felt in my life, was that I was mislabeling this side of the wall. On this side of the wall was misery, which counterfeits pain. Pain is inevitable. It has to happen, and it's actually one of the most important parts of life. But on this side is misery. Misery is optional. Misery is a choice, and it's based in two base emotions, blame and shame. So we feel pain, and instantly we want to say, wait, I don't want to look at that pain. I don't want to show that pain. And so we smother it with this shame and blame. And we say, well, it must be their fault. They're the ones that did this to me. And you hear that a lot in misery speak. Like the victim speak says, life happened to me. But when we step out of victim and step into victor, we say, life's actually happening for me. And I had to learn this the hard way. I went to lunch with a friend as I was going through my divorce. And he sat me down, and I was telling him all the injustices that were happening to me. And he looked at me, and he just kind of stopped me for a minute. He goes, Curtis, you know life doesn't happen to you. It happens for you. Everything that's happening right now is for your good. And you should have seen my eyes. They were the size of saucers, and I'm like, wait, you must not have heard what's happening. Let me restate everything I just said again to dive deep into that misery and start blaming and shaming. And he goes, stop, Curtis. Everything
Very
is
empowering.
for your good. Everything. And it hit me so hard that all of these trials can also be viewed as blessings. But what I was doing is I was taking my pain and I was burying it under that misery so I didn't have to look at it. I think about like this steel box in my heart. I was taking pain and it was trying to flow through me, and I was trapping it right there and then smothering it in misery and saying, no, I'm not going to look at you. I'm not going to open up. I'm not going to hold this and let the pain drip out my eyes. No, I'm just going to shove it in this box and I'm going to clamp it down tight. But one thing about pain is pain and misery are two emotions that are not meant to be held. They're meant to be felt. They're meant to flow through us. And pain demands action. You have to act when you feel pain. You cut your finger, you have to act. But oftentimes with the emotional pain, we say, no, I'm just going to trap you. And the longer it's trapped, the more it grows.
Is there a component of anger in that? You said shame and blame lead to misery.
Yes.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of anger that also adds to misery.
Absolutely. And actually, that's we're doing a 21-day challenge coming up here in September. And it's with the dyad advocacy versus anger. Anger, it turns out, is a counterfeit emotion. Anger, rage, hatred, they counterfeit a really important emotion, and that's advocacy. And let me do a quick pop survey. Here we go, pop quiz.
Let's go. I'm gonna fail it, but I'm ready
Here
for
we go.
it.
You ready?
All right, we're all looking at you.
We're all college dropouts.
You go first.
Yeah, okay, I'm ready for it. Hit me with it. Let's go. Let's go, Curtis.
Here's the pop quiz. Who is Bobby Seale and Huey Newton?
Bobby Seale. I think he's related to Dr. Kenneth Nosewater. That's an Anchorman reference.
I think the short of it is I think these two are failing, including myself. Yep.
Yeah, no idea.
I mean, I thought of Seal the singer, Kiss
Yeah,
from a
for
Rose,
sure.
and
I'm
I
usually best when there are bubbles, A, B, C, or D.
Yeah.
And if
All of the
D's
above?
and above all of the above,
Yeah.
then I'm really good. I'm even gives me an even better chance.
Gives us a shot.
Yeah.
Right?
Who are they?
So Bobby Seale and Huey Newton are people that no one knows. And there's a reason.
got it right.
Hey, we're on the average.
Yeah,
We're the average.
You guys
right?
rocked it. Yes, you rocked it.
Yeah.
Because nobody knows who Bobby Seale and Huey Newton are. But they were the founders of the Black Panthers, the militant organization in the 1950s and 60s.
The Malcolm X took over, right?
He did a little different. But
Okay.
if you look at these two founders of this massive organization, nobody knows who they are today because they took an injustice and they added anger to it. They firebombed cars, they had riots, they killed police officers. Like, it was a militant group. They took this injustice and added anger. But you think about who was Martin Luther King Jr. He was someone that lived at the exact same time, and he saw an injustice. And he said, instead of anger, I'm going to apply advocacy to this. I am not going to stand for racism. I am not going to stand, but I will stand at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with 1 million people, and I will change the world. And that's the power of taking the counterfeits and getting them out of our lives and stepping into the most authentic life we can have. And all of those, once we do that, once we step into the authentic, that leads us to that one emotion that can't be counterfeited. And that emotion is peace. The only emotion that can't be counterfeited is peace. And there's many reasons behind this, including the neuroscience of it.
Is that because peace isn't really an emotion, it's a state of being? Or a state of mind?
It's fascinating. If you look at the neuroscience of peace, it's the craziest thing. Every emotion we experience has a sensory perception tied to it. So when we're feeling an emotion, there's specific chemicals in our brain that are squirting, and there's memories and there's beliefs tied to it, all of that.
And that has usually a physical representation as well, like you perspire, or your heart rate accelerates, or
stress, like you just talked about. Stress, anger does that same thing. Every single one does, except for peace. Scientists have no explanation for peace. There is no peace chemical. There's no peace drug that squirts into the front of our brain. There's no peace chemical that circulates in our body. It's the only emotion that they have no explanation for. And so you look at the neuroscience of this, it's fascinating. But then on the emotion side of peace, peace is the one emotion that there's nothing that looks, acts, and feels like it that creates destructive cycles of disconnection. Everything that looks like it adds to it. And so we could spend a whole hour just on that one topic.
Well, look, I mean, based on these
I'm
two,
feeling peace right now,
that's
bro.
right. I know, that's how it is. You can actually see the effect of when Curtis is talking with you two, I've noticed. Like, you feel like you're just into it because it's so fascinating, because you're like, this could really make
I've actually never heard this before. That's why I think I'm so fascinated by it, because this isn't something I've heard before.
I'm also trying to view it through, and this is maybe not the right lens for me to, or perspective for me to, like, the filter to run this through, but this is inside the Hive. We have a bunch of business owner listeners, and everything that you're saying, I'm just thinking through my partner relationships in business, my customer relationships in business, like my decision making, and it's like, am I operating out of a space of counterfeit, or am I actually, like, managing those scenarios with either guilt or with love, or with, like, the right context and the right emotion? Because I think when I've operated out of spaces of anger or out of shame, or pointing the finger and blaming others, it's like, man, I'm a really unproductive, unsuccessful business owner.
Business is happening to you rather than
for me.
For you.
And then if I look at the times where I've maybe operated in the other space, and those are the moments where I've had my biggest wins, right? Made my best decisions, and so and
Curtis does this. I mean, this is a great segue, because Curtis does this for businesses. He goes in and helps the leadership team work through these issues, right? So tell us about the business application.
Yeah, and I love that your brain went there of, how do I know? How do I know when I'm in the authentic versus the counterfeit? And this Friday, I'm going to a local successful company, and we're talking about one of the dyads that applies so much to business, and that's nice versus kind. It turns out nice is the counterfeit of kind. And this applies to business so deeply. I was having a conversation with another of my friends. He's a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. And he goes, Curtis, where were you last week? And I'm like, what's going on? He goes, I had my entire executive team in the boardroom, and I said, stop being nice. I don't want you to placate to me. I don't want you to be a yes man or yes woman.
It's destructive.
I don't want you to just say whatever I think is great. I need you to challenge me. I need you to do it, but do it in a healthy way. He's like, I wish you were there because I didn't say it nearly as eloquently. I just wanted to say, stop being nice. We need to be productive. We need to be honest. We need to be direct. And so this Friday we're going in and we're doing this for an entire company, is teaching them the model. Each one of these dyads has a model of how to get out of the counterfeit and into the authentic. And so this one is really powerful. But going back to what you said, how do I know? How do I know when I'm in a counterfeit versus
Before you give the
an
answer,
authentic?
it feels like to me the counterfeit is usually temporary. It has a short, I'm nice to you for a moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just,
It requires
Could be.
little effort, is a truth.
Right.
It's
yeah,
like
it's the lazy approach. Whereas if
Yeah.
I'm kind, it's enduring. It's longer lasting. It's more meaningful. It's like, anyway, that was my before you gave the.
yeah. Listen to the
answer.
expert talk. I don't want to hear
Yeah,
you
I
two
know,
cents.
I know.
Well, it's
Actually-
also why we didn't know those two names, because
Right.
that was a
It's
short-lived
true.
leadership style of
Yeah.
Right.
with anger.
Great
right?
point.
Yeah.
Such a good point.
Yeah.
Is that, and like nice, when you think of like toxic nice, you think of the used car salesman, puts on the big smile like, hey, you're my best friend for about 5 minutes. And,
Yeah,
sweet
and
shoes.
Yeah.
Until
In
you
his
tell
case,
me
they
no.
I usually have sweet shoes, so that would be a genuine compliment.
For
but-
sure.
That's nice. And you think of Bambi's best friend, Thumper. Like, we were taught this from kids. If you can't say nothing nice, don't say nothing at all, right?
Right.
But if you think about that statement, if you can't say anything nice, meaning if you can't placate and you can't tell me what I want to hear, well, then go to the corner, keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, don't speak truth, especially when truth needs to be spoken. No, it has to be nice.
I want to pivot off of this real quick because this is actually the business angle for me in my ad spend, in my media. This is outside of the Tax Hive scope, right? On some of my small business. And Tanner, I want to invite you to comment on this because you're the marketer. Right now, in today's culture, counterfeit gets sniffed out like that.
Oh yeah.
The script
Versus authenticity, right?
Yeah, authenticity
Yeah.
is the king right now in sales and in marketing and in messaging. Authenticity sells. It's the production and the lights and the scripting behind a specific pitch versus somebody just kind of like riffing and going off on a more organic message. So speak to that a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're seeing it right now with the rise of influencers. Why are influencers so popular, and why are
Maybe some of them are counterfeits.
But yeah, for sure. But in a way, they are more authentic than the Hollywood alternative.
yeah, or
right
the
then-
business owner speaking for themselves,
Right.
saying, "Oh, I'm great."
Yeah, like that's why, I think as consumers, we're sick and tired of the bull crap, and we want to see real. So like what performs well from an ad perspective is not some highly edited production like Devin was talking about. It's a user-generated piece of content taken from an iPhone that's got horrible quality audio, horrible lighting, and it just doesn't look and feel like an ad. It looks and feels like it's a piece of quality content that's generated from a friend. That's what performs.
UGC is king right
Yeah,
now, right?
it is.
It's funny because Merriam-Webster, the word of the year is authenticity. It was looked up more than any other word in English language last year, was authentic or authenticity, because people are craving authenticity right now. And it's funny because the way I found out about this dyad is I had a friend call me and he's like, hey, Curtis, do people say you're a nice guy? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a nice guy.
Right.
And he goes, the nice guy is the most despicable person on the planet. I'm like, man, hold on.
I got personal real
I was
quick.
like,
Yeah.
you so set me up on this.
Right.
And,
You and Gru are the most despicable people.
and I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, the nice guy is not honest. They'll tell you what you want to hear, but they're not honest. The nice guy is manipulative. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, okay, let's do an experiment. When's the last time you did the dishes? I'm like, well, last night. He goes, did you do the dishes because you love doing the dishes, or were you trying to get something from someone? And I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, crap. Yeah. And so I'm Curtis. I'm a recovering nice guy. And it, each one of these, like, going back to your question of how do I know when I'm in the authentic versus in the counterfeit? And there's 4 criteria that clearly state, and the first one is connection. Does this emotion connect me? Does it connect me to my true self? Does it connect me to others? Does it connect me to God? And does it connect me to truth? If it connects in those 4 ways, there's 90% chance it's authentic. It's almost guaranteed. Connection is the first one. The second is direction. Where does this emotion take me? We talked about anger, fear, we talked about shame. Every authentic emotion will take us forward, upward, or will bring us together. But here's what's fascinating. When I was researching this, I thought, okay, it's going to be the opposite for the counterfeits, right? It's going to be downward or this. It's not. Counterfeit emotions, they take us back to that emotion. They circle, they spin, and they keep us trapped. That's why
spiral.
That's why it's such a trap, is because they just bring you back to more of that emotion. Anxiety brings you back to anxiety. Fear brings you back to fear. Shame brings you back to shame. Lust builds on itself. You have to have more lust, because if you don't, lust will die. And so it builds on itself, so it just circles. So that's the second criteria, is what direction does this emotion take me? The third is motivation. What is this motivated by? And every authentic emotion is motivated by love and surrender. Surrender is one of my favorite emotions. It is one of the most transcendent emotions you can feel. When I surrender, when I give myself to God, give myself to my journey, give myself to
You're operating out of a space of humility, teachable, right? That kind of surrender emotion.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens. The counterfeits, guess what the motivation on counterfeits are? Fear and control. Those are the 2 base emotions behind every, and you talked about it. You're like, well, when I'm angry or when I'm trying to, I'm all of these feelings. Yeah, it's a fear response. It's a control response. And then the final one is valuation. What does this emotion value me at, and what does it value you at? If it says my value is more than just this life, it's divine, that I am a divine being, then it's authentic. If it says I'm worthless, and not only worthless, but let's separate it, I'm worth less, meaning I'm comparing myself to everyone else. It's not only that I'm at 0, it's because you're here, I'm below 0. Now I have to be less than. That's a counterfeit. So those 4 different criteria: connection, direction, motivation, evaluation.
We need another day.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right? These guys are.
I'm ready to keep asking more
Let me just
questions.
let me wind it down. I just obviously have a $100 bill. I don't know if that was something you wanted to share. Like, okay, so that's
it's
one.
a counterfeit. I can
Is
tell.
that a counterfeit or not? Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
I sniffed that out. I sniffed that out.
That's one. And then I've heard the story, and if it's okay with you, sharing your experience with your best friend, if that's okay. And then that was kind of part of your why of what sent you down this journey as an author and the impact. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
Okay.
I really appreciate that. So, like I shared, as I was going through my own trials, I realized the difference between pain and misery and kind and nice. And I was fascinated, like I was engulfed with this idea that there's counterfeits. And I started researching, saying, well, is there a counterfeit for every authentic? And I found the answer was yes. And I'm like, well, I've got to take a class. I've got to, get a YouTube video. I've got to do something. And there was nothing out there. The closest thing I found was a Buddhist teaching called Near Enemies and Far Enemies, and it's actually not a similar comparison, but it's the closest thing I found. I said, how have I never learned this? How have I never learned this at home, in church, at scouts, at school, at you name it? I've never learned this my whole life. And at the same time, one of my best friends from college, Jerry Williamson, he was. I can't look at you, Sean. I know what's going to happen.
Look at me. I'm easier to keep your emotions stable.
He doesn't feel anything.
Yeah, exactly.
He was going through a similar divorce, and he didn't understand the difference between guilt and shame. and he didn't understand the difference between pain and misery. And he bought into the counterfeit. And I'll never forget the night I was at dinner, and I'm sitting there, and I get a text on my phone that says, "Have you seen Jerry?" And I knew that he'd given into the counterfeits. And I just ended the dinner. I stood up and I was like, I got to go right now. And I got in my car and I drove to his former spouse's house, who still cared for him deeply. And we took her 2 golden doodle dogs out. It was nighttime, and it had started to rain lightly, and we were circling the block over and over again, thinking of who we can call, who we can text. And she got a call, and it was like a pillar fell out of the sky and just crushed her to the ground. And she looked up just sobbing and said, "He's gone." And I'm not okay with that. I am not okay with how he left this life, because he was so loved. And if you knew Jerry, he could walk into a room and he could make the entire room just laugh till their guts hurt. And he bought into the counterfeit, just like you said. Like, this looks real. It does, but it's worthless. It does no good. It actually is very destructive. And that was the day I said, I've got to change my entire path. I'd written my first book all about entrepreneurship, and it was a Wall Street Journal bestseller, all of that stuff. And I called my publisher because we were writing another business book. And I said, hey, I've got to table this. And honestly, I don't even know if I'm going to come back to the business stuff, because there's a message that I need to share with the world. And I need to share with people like Jerry, because when we step out of the counterfeit and into the authentic, then we can find that peace. We can find that joy, and we don't have to live there. We don't have to live in fear, in control. There is a better way, and that's what started my journey.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that that's obviously the more impactful, the more meaningful, and the more significant than any impact that Counterfeit Emotions can have on a business. But I also think businesses are people, like whether your partners, your employees, your customers, and authenticity, I think, can rescue businesses and rescue people for sure. I've learned a lot. I'm excited to dive in and read more and discover more on what you're sharing, man. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it was an honor. So
thank you.
Thanks for your willingness to open up too, and that's a hard thing to talk about, and we really appreciate you sharing that, because it gives you such a powerful why of what you're doing. And you can see these 2 guys are really into it, and it's making an impact with us all right now. So we really appreciate it. So how do people join the 21-day challenge? How do they follow that journey? How do they jump on board?
Yeah, you can go to counterfeitemotions.com. As well, we have a really beautiful, active Facebook group. It's incredible, the support and the resources you can get. The 21-day challenge, the next one we're doing is anger versus advocacy. And the challenge is, can you get rid of anger out of your life in 21 days? And the promise is, yes, you can. By doing these daily activities every single day for 21 days, you can get it out. The one after that, we're doing power versus control. Control is the counterfeit of power. And then after that is excellence versus perfectionism. And perfectionism is such a killer. And so yeah, they can go to the website, join any of the 21-day challenges, and then join our Facebook group
Cool.
as well.
That's awesome.
I think everyone watching this is going to jump on board. and you'll make a great impact as you have.
I got
so
a lot
far.
of anger I got to weed out.
Yes, he
I was
does.
just
He
gonna-
needs
I was
both.
just
He
gonna
needs
say,
both of these
Tanner needs a
classes.
special invite when
Yeah.
it's lust versus love.
Yeah, I need a special invite on all of them.
All of them, yeah.
This is so true. Like, oh, I wish we had a whole nother half
Yeah,
hour because
these guys need
no,
another
this
few
is
days with you. Clearly,
No, this is great, man.
this
Yeah.
is love versus lust.
Where can we buy your
is
book?
so misunderstood.
Is it out yet?
it's coming out, right?
So it hasn't come out yet. Yeah, I'm still in the final stages of research, just to validate everything
Yeah.
and make sure that it's just rock solid. So we're looking at either May or September of next year for
Nice.
for the launch of the book.
look for that coming as well.
But yeah, you can follow me on social media because I put out daily content. We write an article every week around the topics,
Yeah.
and so
What's your
yeah.
Instagram handle, socials handles?
Authentic Curtis.
Authentic Curtis.
Yeah,
Giving you a follow.
awesome.
Great job.
It sounds nice.
Let's hope not. Let's
He's a
hope.
nice guy. He's an authentic guy.
Thank you so much, Curtis. Honor,
Yeah,
man.
nice to
we
meet
really
you. Thanks for
appreciate
being
it.
here.
Yeah, thanks so much.
guys.